Hello everyone, welcome to A Cup of Joe. It's been a minute since I've been in here, but I feel like after last weekend's game, it was pretty necessary to come in here and just break down what went wrong. Well, today I'm coming to you by TCI's very own Alex Dodd. Thank you for being in here with me today, Alex.
Good to be here. I mean, we don't really get to see each other very often anymore because of the quarantine, coronavirus stuff. So it's good to be here.
Good. Well, after last Saturday, I think it's fair to say that is an instant classic. And the word loss is just not a word that Clemson football hears very often. But let's hope that loss will turn into a lesson. So today we're going to break down what we think went wrong in last Saturday's game. And let's start with the run game. They stopped Travis Etienne, and I think that showed that Clemson's offense kind of all year has been a one-trick pony. If you can stop Travis Etienne, it showed in the Notre Dame game that you pretty much can stop Clemson's offense.
Well, the last few weeks, teams have shown that that's kind of what they're going to do. They're going to load up the box, they're going to commit 6 or 7 guys to the run on every play, and they're going to make the quarterback beat him with his arm. This time it was DJ Uiagalelei. Usually it's Trevor Lawrence. But they really squared up and said, all right, we're going to make the freshman beat us with his arm. And I think Clemson did a pretty decent job of still trying to move the ball offensively. I mean, they had a ton of yards on offense. DJ broke freshman records and most passing yards against a Notre Dame team. So Clemson did what they could do to move the ball and really had to make the screen game the run game, but they didn't start doing that until the second and third quarter, and that kind of showed. They really kind of were running up against a brick wall in the first quarter and didn't, like you said, didn't total a lot of rushing yards for the game, but I think Clemson did what they could do to try not to be a one-trick pony by making those screens essentially an extension of the run game. But you're right. I mean, Clemson has to do more to run the football if they want to win against a good football team like Notre Dame, and they really struggled to do that on Saturday.
And I think you can't put all the blame on Travis Etienne. I mean, the O-line just was not creating any holes for him to run into. And that's another problem we've seen all year long, that the O-line is just not where it needs to be this year for Travis to be an effective running back.
Yeah, I think Clemson is having some depth issues on the offensive line that they're not used to having in years past. Some of the backups have been dealing with injuries, and obviously you saw Matt Bockhorst went out for Clemson in the third quarter of the game, and that was a huge loss for Clemson. I mean, really, for Clemson to have won with the pieces that they were missing, they had to play a near-perfect game, and it just wasn't that. There were a lot of mistakes made by the Tigers. Coach Sweeney talked about it before the game that, if we're going to go out here and beat Notre Dame, we can't give them anything, and Clemson gave Notre Dame a lot. And really, it shows a lot about the team to be missing as many pieces as they did to still be,
a close game,
competitive and push it to double overtime.
Well, that brings up my next point. That is the reason why they lost, is just giving Notre Dame so much. A lot of it was playing messy. They had 2 fumbles in back-to-back drives that ended up giving Notre Dame 10 points. And you can't play a team like Notre Dame and give them something like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the 4th game this season where Clemson has allowed a non-offensive touchdown. You had Trevor's pick 6 against Syracuse. You had the blocked field goal for a touchdown against Miami. And then the last 2 weeks, a Travis Etienne fumble that turned into 6 points the other way. And really, I mean, that 10-point swing, that was critical for Clemson. That was a time in the game where Clemson had already scored. They'd gotten kind of back in the mix after that big touchdown drive when they were down 10-0. And then you give up 10 points, and it was a huge swing.
And it was right before the half.
Yeah, right before the half.
So Notre Dame went into that locker room like, oh, we've got this. We really can beat this team. So it didn't just athletically give them an advantage. It gave them a mental advantage. Because they could stew on it while they were sitting at halftime. Yeah,
and props to Clemson for going and getting the field goal at the end of the half. I mean, that was big. You saw that against Boston College. You saw it again against Notre Dame to get points going into the locker room. Because if Clemson doesn't go down and get the field goal there, then who knows what happens in the third quarter. But those are just mistakes you can't make in a football game, especially when you're heading into the halftime locker room.
I agree. Now, the last point I have to bring up, and this is kind of a specific thing that went wrong, but it was not getting that first down with 2 minutes left to go in the game. Even if you were listening to the game, the announcer said, oh, Clemson has this ball in their hands to put this game away. And everybody thought, once Clemson had the ball with the offense that they had with 2 minutes left, this game is over. And if you're a championship team, you're able to close the game at that point. So that is just having that mentality of, okay, we have the ball, we're gonna get this first down, and we're gonna end it right here, right now.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unaccounted variables that a lot of people may not have picked up on that drive. In particular, Clemson was trying to make Notre Dame use their timeouts. So that's why they ran the ball. And then you had the penalty that was declined, and there was all that mess with the penalty, and the ball should have been blown in there. So the clock should have been running, and Notre Dame should have had to use a timeout. But Clemson, really, you've got to take some shots there. They didn't throw the ball until third down on that drive. And really, if you get a first down, like you said, you've got the ball and you can put the game away. And Clemson really didn't take advantage of that opportunity there at the end of the game.
I think you could just see that with each team, there was such a different mindset. I don't know about you, but when I was watching the game, watching Notre Dame, it was like they had been preparing for this game since last fall. I think Notre Dame kind of had a chip on their shoulder that they're a team that has tradition, but they haven't been talked about in recent years like Clemson has. And so I think in their mind was like, if we can beat Clemson, we'll be talked about again. And with Clemson, it's like, oh, we just have to get another win. I think every week, it's not that you're happy to win, you're almost like relieved to win. And I think it was on this loss as a wake-up call for Clemson, like, oh, we can't just settle. We have to have that same mindset that Notre Dame had in that game of, go in with every game at attack mode.
Yeah, this was a huge game for Brian Kelly. It was a huge game for the Notre Dame program. They had lost their last 11 games against top 5 teams. And we're talking about a Notre Dame program that has more tradition than probably any. So they had a huge chip on their shoulder. They came in and played their hearts out. I think Clemson did about as good as they could with the pieces that they had. Clemson made a ton of mistakes. But with all the injuries that were plaguing the Clemson team, there were 3 defensive players in the game for Clemson starters on the last drive. You had 3 big injuries on defense coming into the game. So for Clemson to be as injury-riddled as they were coming into the game, it shows a lot about the program that they were able to push the game into double overtime. But like we've said, you can't commit all these mistakes on top of injuries that you had coming into the game and walk away with a win, especially on the road. Yeah,
I agree. I think it's safe to say that if we see them again in the ACC championship and we, have our whole team and we play at our best effort, that I think it'll be a pretty easy win for Clemson. Not easy, but it'll be a doable win.
Well, I think if Clemson has those pieces back, particularly on defense.
Yes, especially on defense, because there was a lot of key players out on defense.
Yeah, you were missing Tyler Davis in the middle. You're missing James Skalski in the middle. You were missing Mike Jones. And then at the end of the game, the list went on and on. Brian Bresee, you saw Nolan Turner, Andrew Booth, a ton of guys leaving the game. But if Clemson has those pieces back, it makes for a different game in a neutral site if both teams are to make it to Charlotte. But obviously, we still have a lot of football left before we get to that point.
You're right about that. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please keep up with the Clemson Insider as we have full coverage of the 2020 Clemson football season.